Sup, nerd? What the heck's an indie game? As I'm writing this, the Game Awards 2023 is about a week away, and they caused a bit of a stir with the announcement of nominees for Best Independent Game.
For Best Independent Game, the nominees are Cocoon, Dave the Diver, Dredge, Sea of Stars, and Viewfinder.
Seems pretty normal to me, right? I mean, all these games look like indie games, but eagle-eyed viewers out there might have noticed something. The second nomination, Dave the Diver, was published by Nexon? One of the biggest publishers in the games industry? The Game Awards themselves describe an indie game as a game made outside the traditional publisher system. It would be a stretch to say that Nexon isn't a traditional publisher. So why was this included? And to answer that, Jeff Keighley, the face of the Game Awards, had this to say.
Look, it's a great question. Independent can mean different things to different people, and it's sort of a broad term. You can argue, does independent mean the budget of the game? Does independent mean where the source of the financing was? Does it mean the team size? Is it the kind of independent spirit of the game? Meaning a smaller game that's sort of different.
And yeah, it's most, if not all of those things. To most people, at least. That last part where he asks if it's a smaller game that's sort of different is probably the whole reason why it's on this list, and definitely why most viewers wouldn't bat an eye when they see it. And I figured most people probably don't think about what it actually means for a game to be indie. Now, this isn't a Game Awards takedown video or anything. I see this as an opportunity to put a definition on what indie actually means. So disclaimer, don't harass Jeff or any Game Awards staff over this, please. They're doing their best, and this is intended as an educational video. Thanks. So what makes a game indie? Well, I think the Game Awards is actually onto something when they describe an independent game as a game made outside of the traditional publisher system. But if you take a look at the nominees this year, you might notice that all of them, except for one, actually have a publisher.
Even something like Dredge is published by Team 17. So is that independent or not? Because you have a publisher.
Well, that's actually a really good question, and the answer is yes, but the reason why is a bit complicated. You kind of have to focus on the traditional part of traditional publisher. Normally, a relationship with a traditional publisher means signing over part of your game's revenue in exchange for financial support, and other resources like marketing, training, and help with certifications. The downside to this sort of relationship is that it can come with a few caveats. The publisher might ask to reduce the budget for your game in hopes that it might be easier to make that revenue back later, and in some of the worst cases, they might exert some sort of creative control over your process or even ask for the rights to your game. This is where boutique publishers come in. Their relationship with developers is less traditional, in that most of them prefer to be hands-off from the creative process. They provide mostly marketing help and some financial support, but focus on their individual objectives. The best example I can think of for this is Annapurna Interactive, which focuses on publishing games that are personal, emotional, and original. In general, this means they find games that are already in production that match their identity and offer to publish those. As a result, you can spot an Annapurna game from a mile away, all of them focusing on personal, emotional struggles. Because these games are already in production, it gives the publisher the opportunity to choose games that already match their mission statement and step away from the creative process themselves, leading to a more hands-off approach than the traditional publishing relationship. Since these boutique publishers tend to be a lot smaller than traditional publishers, they also tend to have more personal associations with their developers, which leads to more creative and unique games overall. The downside to smaller boutique publishers is that they generally have less resources to move around, so the games they publish tend to have pretty small budgets and even smaller teams as a result. A lot of people consider team size to be really important for deciding if a game is indie or not, but usually this is just a reflection of the game's budget. Keeping the team small means keeping the budget and scope for your game small as well. This imposes limitations on the project and also leads to more creative and unique games. But budget does come into play here in a big way.
You know, in other industries, sometimes there are things. I think in the film industry, the budget can't be above this amount of dollars or it's not independent. So I don't know.
You know, that's also a really good point. The Film Independent Spirit Awards, for example, has a maximum budget of $30 million for a film to be considered. And maybe the Game Awards could benefit from implementing a hard number like that as well. The only issue is that budgetary consideration will always be a blurry line. The Spirit Awards reevaluates their maximum budgets on a regular basis, going from $22.5 million in 2019 to the $30 million it is today. Currency changes value constantly, and especially with inflation being what it is today, it's hard to pin down an exact number anyway. Point is, indie games always have a low budget. There's not much point in calling a game indie when it can be compared to a traditionally published AAA game anyway.
Some people have said Larian with Baldur's Gate 3. That's an independent game. Kojima Productions with Death Stranding. Some people say that's an independent game. And even though that's an independent studio, of course it's funded by PlayStation.
Exactly! Games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Death Stranding are technically independently published. Nobody owns their studios, and they don't have publishing companies doing all of the marketing and certification for them, like smaller studios do. The budgets of Larian Studios and Kojima Productions are massive, so they start to edge themselves out of the indie space. So then, an indie game can't have a traditional publisher, and they can't have a massive budget. Those two criteria combined have the effect of creating games that are more artistic, unique, and with sometimes very powerful messaging. That's why most people associate those features with indie games. It's easy to be confused when you see all these games sharing all these qualities, but it's not those qualities in themselves that make a game indie. It's the conditions that conjure those qualities into existence.
Dave the Diver is independent in spirit, and it's a small game. I don't know what the budget is, but it's probably a relatively small budget game. But it's from a large entity, whereas the other games on that list are from much smaller studios.
It's easy to see how Dave the Diver ended up on the Game Awards list. From an outside perspective, it does share all of the small artistic qualities that most indie games have. But in the words of Jai-Ho Huang, the game director for Dave the Diver,
simply put, Dave the Diver is not an indie game. Indie developers work harder and with fewer resources than we do. Compared to other Nexon projects, our structure is loose and requires a lot of independence. Nevertheless, the situation is naturally better than that of indie developers fighting on the streets.
So is Dave the Diver an indie game? The director doesn't seem to think so, but it was developed by a small team called Mint Rocket who... Oh, they're not an independent company. They're just a division of Nexon? Well, I guess that solves that.